Ever pick up a discarded water bottle on your walk? I began, a grim edge to my voice. Down south, a girl lost her life over something just as trivial. I once handled a case that still chills me to the bone. A 12-year-old girl, strangled to death, her small body violated, coal chunks and broken branches jammed into her lower regions. The scene offered a single, stark clue, a blackish-red fingerprint, smudged and distorted. But the database comparison threw us into a deeper darkness. The print belonged to a man who had been dead for a year. The case file photos from October 2016 are seared into my memory. I can still picture them vividly, even now. It was a desolate, blackened landscape, the back slope of the coal mountain. Lying amidst the dark mounds was a child, arms outstretched, legs bent at unnatural angles. Her thin frame was stark against the rough coal. Her trousers lay discarded a few yards away, a splash of faded denim against the monochrome setting. And then the horror. Her lower body, brutally violated, stuffed with crude, dark matter. I slammed the case file shut, the sound echoing in the sterile office. My patience snapped. I immediately dialed the local forensics team leader. DNA? I demanded, my voice tight with urgency. He explained that the coal chunk, presumably used to strike the girl's head, lay beside her body. But it was clean, only her blood staining its surface. Apart from the fingerprint, they'd found nothing, no other trace of biological material. The fingerprint, he continued, his voice measured, it's a thumbprint, found on the left side of her neck. The coal dust mixed with blood, that's what preserved it. The autopsy report confirmed the initial blunt force trauma to the head had only caused a concussion, a temporary blackout. The actual cause of death was asphyxiation, strangulation, by hand, and likely a single hand. She was tiny, the team leader elaborated. A child that size, strangling with two hands wouldn't allow for proper leverage. Single-handed, that makes sense. The thumb would have to exert immense pressure, the nail digging in. And the print is on the left side of her neck. I interjected, my mind racing, connecting the dots, meaning the dominant hand, the hand applying the force, was the left. I cut him off, my voice rising, almost a shout. That fingerprint, it's a thumbprint, a left thumbprint. This guy's a lefty. He paused, a beat of silence on the line. Yes, a left thumbprint. But there's something else. He hesitated, stammering slightly. I braced myself for the worst. The print was too smudged to identify. Another dead end. Just as I was about to press him, his next words sent a shiver down my spine, a cold dread washing over me. We got a match, he said slowly, each word heavy. The fingerprint belongs to a man named Ethan Bell. But we checked. And this Ethan Bell, he died a year ago. The database information confirmed it. Ethan Bell, arrested once for aggravated assault years back, fingerprints on file. Cause of death, illness, a year prior. And the fingerprint entry location? Over 1,200 miles away, a different province entirely. Impossible. Utterly, chillingly impossible. How could a dead man's fingerprint be the only clue on the neck of a girl murdered just hours ago? I stood there, phone clutched in my hand, the words echoing in my mind, a hollow, disbelieving blankness. Adrenaline surged. I grabbed my coat, practically ripped it off the hanger. My backpack lay open, zipper undone, but I didn't bother with it. I had to get to the scene. Rushing down the stairs, my legs felt strangely weak, almost rubbery. This case, it was beyond bizarre, bordering on the supernatural. I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. I could only hope that a fresh look at the scene, even in daylight, might reveal something, anything, of value. Dawn painted the sky a bruised purple and gray as I scrambled up the coal mountain, the loose coal crunching under my boots. But as I crested the ridge, I froze, the breath knocked out of me. There was no scene left. The forensics team had removed the girl's body. Police tape cordoned off the area, but no one had been left to guard it. The miners, in their relentless, grinding rhythm, had already resumed their work. 2 days and nights of digging had passed. Freshly mined coal, black and gleaming, now blanketed everything, burying the crime scene under a thick layer of dust and debris. My team of 4 officers and I spent what felt like hours sifting through the coal dust, our hands and faces quickly becoming coated in black grime. We finally unearthed the yellow police tape, a pathetic, blackened ribbon snaking through the coal. I blew my nose, a black cloud erupting onto the dust. Rage, hot and blinding, flared within me. I grabbed the local team leader, practically shoving him against a mound of coal. What the hell happened to scene security? I roared, my voice raw with fury. The crime scene, it's gone. Swallowed up. A burning sensation shot up my nose, the metallic tang of blood filling my mouth. I pressed my hand to my nostril, fearing a nosebleed contaminating the already compromised scene. Above, the sky mirrored my mood, heavy, dark clouds pressing down. But even as the anger boiled, a sliver of weary understanding crept in. This was a vast district. Petty thefts, bar fights, domestic disputes. They had to respond to everything. The local forensics team was skeletal, just 3 people. They were stretched thin, impossibly so. Frustration gnawed at me, a caged animal within my chest. I paced the perimeter of the destroyed scene, the useless energy thrumming through me. This was a first. A case with no crime scene. Leads were gone, evidence buried, the physical space obliterated. I had to shift focus, pivot to the human element. The victim was identified. My next step was to meet her parents, currently housed in a local guest house, under police protection. The moment they saw me, the couple collapsed to their knees, a wave of raw grief washing over them. Sobbing, they pleaded, "Our only child, our little girl, gone just like that. You have to catch who did this." I quickly helped them up, my own emotions churning, trying to project a calm, reassuring presence. I took a breath, adjusted my tone, and began gently questioning them, seeking any thread, any detail that could unravel this nightmare. The girl's father was a miner, his hands calloused and stained with coal dust even now. Her mother, worn and weary, didn't work, spending her days scavenging scraps around the mine to supplement their meager income, earn a few yuan for vegetables. On the day of the murder, the mother had been unwell, a cold making her feverish and weak. The little girl, ever helpful, had gone out alone to collect recyclables. By 10 that night, when she hadn't returned, panic set in. They'd called for help, a desperate, frantic search party scouring the area through the long, cold night, but finding nothing. Until the next morning, when miners, starting their shift, stumbled upon her broken body on the coal mountain. Local detectives had already interviewed the parents, run background checks, explored their social circles. They were simple, hardworking people, quiet and kind. No enemies, no debts, no obvious conflicts. I pressed them gently, asking about anything unusual the girl might have mentioned, her usual scavenging routes. Then, out of the blue, I dropped the name. Has anyone named Ethan Bell ever come around your home? They stared at me, blankly, confusion clouding their grief-stricken faces. They exchanged a bewildered glance, then looked back at me, shaking their heads in unison. Ethan Bell? No, we don't know anyone by that name. Their raw, immediate reaction seemed genuine, devoid of deception. I was at a dead end, every avenue seemingly blocked. Desperate, I called my mentor, my old partner, Black Cat, Jack, a seasoned veteran with an uncanny intuition for the darkness of the human heart. I poured out the details, the impossible fingerprint, the ruined crime scene, the dead ends. Silence met my torrent of words. Then, Jack's voice, calm and steady, cut through the static. He didn't offer solutions, just 2 stark, unsettling questions. Why, he asked, his voice low and deliberate, would a killer travel 1,200 miles to commit such a brutal act against a child, using the fingerprint of a dead man? And why, he continued, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. A fingerprint already in the system, with a prior criminal record? Fingerprint databases aren't exactly Fort Knox. If you want to use a fake print, why choose that one? What's the point? What's the game here? Jack's questions hung in the air, unanswered, unsettling. He wasn't offering easy answers, just forcing me to confront the sheer illogicality of it all. That fingerprint, he finally said, his tone firm, a quiet command. You need to look at it again, personally. Later, I understood. He wasn't giving me a lead. He was giving me a lifeline. He was pulling me back from the edge. From the moment I'd seen those horrific crime scene photos, blind rage had consumed me, clouding my judgment, pushing aside clear thinking. I was so focused on the outrage that I was losing sight of the most crucial piece of evidence, that impossible, dead man's fingerprint. The sterile chill of the morgue always felt heavier than any other cold. The little girl lay before me, still and pale, her small face drained of life. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my nerves. I leaned over her, my gaze fixed on the faint, smudged fingerprint on her neck. I carefully measured its position, comparing it to the crime scene photos, confirming the location with the medical examiner. No other foreign biological material on her body, just that print. I straightened up, took a step back, and bowed my head, a silent promise echoing in the cold air. I will find who did this to you. Two possibilities, stark and unsettling, remained. Either someone was deliberately, meticulously framing a dead man, or Ethan Bell wasn't dead. Dead men couldn't kill. It had to be a living hand that choked the life out of that child. I needed to trace anyone who had been connected to Ethan Bell, anyone who could have had access to his fingerprints, anyone who could have known about his death, and chosen to exploit it. The list grew: family, friends, former colleagues, casual acquaintances. Nearly 200 names. A mountain of legwork. With the local police's help, we began discreet digital surveillance, cell phone records, hotel registrations, travel histories for everyone on the list, cross-referencing against the time frame of the murder and the location. Nothing. No one on that list had been anywhere near the crime scene around the time of the girl's death. 200 names, 200 dead ends. I tracked down the precinct that had originally taken Ethan Bell's fingerprints, 1,200 miles away. The next day, I was on a plane. A small town precinct, a world away from the grim coal mines. Officer Miller, the veteran cop who had taken Bell's prints years ago, greeted me with a warm, almost grandfatherly smile. Officer Miller, a cop who seemed woven into the fabric of his small town, drove me around, a running commentary on local life, the best diner in town, the tea shop that gave him special treatment. His hair was mostly white, his lips tinged blue, a testament to years of late nights and too much coffee, or maybe something stronger. He was the man who had fingerprinted Ethan Bell. He led me into a newly built apartment complex, the air still smelling faintly of fresh paint. As he raised his hand to knock on the door, a bizarre thought flashed through my mind. What if Ethan Bell answers? What if this whole thing is a grotesque mistake, and he's alive? The door swung open. My breath hitched. For a split second, my heart leaped. The man standing there, he bore a striking resemblance to the photos of Ethan Bell, but older, much older, and glasses perched on his nose. Officer Miller quickly introduced him. This is Mr. Bell, Ethan's father. Reality snapped back into focus. I shook old Mr. Bell's hand, the initial shock receding. Officer Miller launched into small talk with Mr. Bell, catching up on local gossip. I excused myself, stepping into the small bathroom. A single toothbrush, a single razor. The room spoke of a solitary occupant. The toothbrush handle faced right, a subtle sign of right-handedness. I ran my fingers along the grout lines between the bathroom tiles, the white sealant on the walls and floors showing consistent where relatively new, confirming this was a recently renovated apartment. Simple, modern furnishings. New money, likely. Emerging from the bathroom, my gaze landed on Mr. Bell's right hand, cradling a teacup. A small detail, but enough. My unease began to solidify into a theory. Mr. Bell, I began, casually, this apartment is new, isn't it? Nicely done, modern. Yes, just moved in recently, he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. Actually, I bought it for Ethan, years ago. He passed away before it was finished. My wife died years ago, so after Ethan, well, my daughter-in-law wanted a fresh start, moved back home. I sold my old place, gave her the money. Couldn't bring myself to sell this one though. Too many memories. So, I finished the renovations and moved in myself. The apartment for Ethan. A father's love, a son's lost future. I pressed gently. Whose name is on the property deed? Ethan's, I presume. A critical piece of the puzzle, if my hunch was right. Yes, Ethan's, he answered without hesitation. Mr. Bell, I continued, my voice still calm, conversational. Would you happen to still have the original purchase contract? I'd just like to take a look, if you don't mind. Polite, almost apologetic. Mr. Bell, slightly puzzled but obliging, nodded. He went into the back room, returning a moment later with a folder containing the contract. I took it, my fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. I flipped straight to the last page. The signature lines, the witness signatures, and the fingerprint boxes. There, right there. Signatures, yes. But instead of thumbprints, beside each signature were index fingerprints. Ethan Bell had signed with his index finger, not his thumb. And then I noticed something else, a subtle, almost invisible detail. All the fingerprints, both index fingers, tilted slightly to the left. Leaving Mr. Bell's apartment, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Outside, the local forensics tech, who had accompanied me, asked, anything? I held out my right hand, mimicking pressing a thumbprint. Then my left hand, mimicking the same action. Ethan Bell, I said, a quiet certainty in my voice, wasn't left-handed. The tech's eyes widened, comprehension dawning. You're saying, the thumbprint at the crime scene, it couldn't be him? The deceased Ethan Bell was increasingly unlikely to be our killer. But the strangeness deepened. Back at the precinct, I scanned the index fingerprints from the contract into the system, comparing them against the thumbprint on file from Ethan Bell's assault arrest. No match. Not a single point of congruence. Ethan Bell's own fingerprints didn't match. Ethan Bell's fingerprints? I ran the contract fingerprints through the national database. The screen flickered, and a face appeared. A face completely different from Ethan Bell's. A face I didn't recognize. But perhaps a living Ethan Bell might have recognized it. The name flashed across the screen. Liam O'Connell. Liam O'Connell. The file showed him as a former classmate of Ethan Bell's. Over a decade ago, they'd been involved in a brawl together, both earning aggravated assault charges, and both, crucially, having their fingerprints taken at the time of their arrest. I pulled up the archived case file from that old assault. It was a teenage fight, fueled by hormones and misplaced loyalty. Ethan Bell and Liam O'Connell, friends, had both been vying for the attention of the same girl. A rival group, 10 strong, had decided to teach Ethan a lesson. No serious injuries, a messy brawl, settled out of court. I leaned back in my chair, the stale office air thick with cigarette smoke, the clatter of the ancient printer a rhythmic backdrop to my thoughts. The events of that night, 10 years ago, began to coalesce in my mind. It was late, after midnight. Officer Miller, the same Officer Miller who had greeted me so warmly today, had been called out to process the scene of the brawl. 20-plus young men, all needing fingerprinting. Late night, tired cop, chaotic scene. In the rush, in the confusion, he'd mixed up the fingerprint cards. Ethan Bell's prints, mistakenly labeled as Liam O'Connell's. Liam O'Connell's, incorrectly attributed to Ethan Bell. In the primitive fingerprinting methods of the time, using ink and paper, errors happened. Later, when the digital system came online, the mismatched prints were uploaded, perpetuating the mistake. And now, years later, a 12-year-old girl was dead, and the system, flawed and fallible, had pointed to a dead man. A cosmic error, a statistical anomaly, a tragic twist of fate. I stubbed out my cigarette, a grim certainty settling in. I grabbed the printout, the new match, and strode towards Officer Miller's break room, kicking the door open with a bang. Officer Miller, headphones on, legs propped up, was lost in his music. I ripped the headphones off, ignoring his startled jump. Before he could react, I slapped the printout into his face. You screwed up Ethan Bell's fingerprints. He stared at the paper, blinking, confusion warring with dawning horror. He stammered, the words failing him. He knew the near impossibility, the infinitesimal chance of such a mistake. Yet, here it was, proof in black and white. And of those 20-plus young men from that decade-old brawl, 3 had reoffended over the years. 2 more fights, nothing serious. But the third was Liam O'Connell. Rape, attempted rape, brutal assault of the victim, leaving her critically injured. And he was a fugitive, on the run. Liam O'Connell, our dead man, our prime suspect. And now, potentially, a killer. I had to find him. This time, he wasn't just running from the law. He was running from justice for a murdered child. Where in God's name was Liam O'Connell hiding? I pulled up Liam O'Connell's old case files, the fugitive reports, the years of fruitless searches. Since his escape, he'd vanished, leaving no trace. No contact with family. No phone calls, no credit card activity, nothing. The fugitive task force had been hunting him for 5 years. Annual sweeps, targeted operations, all ending in empty air. I suspected he'd likely gone completely underground, fabricated a new identity, a new life. I tasked the local precinct with searching recent new resident registrations, birth records, anything that might suggest a fabricated identity. I also had them check phone records for all of O'Connell's known relatives, looking for any calls originating from the area of the coal mine. In this day and age, vanishing completely was almost impossible. A modern man, without a cell phone, without any digital footprint? Unlikely, unless he was incredibly disciplined, incredibly careful, or incredibly lucky, or using someone else's identity, someone in his family. But even burner phones left traces. And 5 years of silence. It was almost unnerving. Deep down, I knew these digital dragnets were long shots. Finding a ghost like O'Connell required more than data. It required understanding the man, his motivations, his weaknesses. The real breakthrough wouldn't come from technology. It would come from understanding Liam O'Connell himself. I spent days poring over his file, the paper growing thick, the details accumulating. I read and reread, searching for patterns, for clues hidden in plain sight. Late into the nights, hunched over the files, a different image of Liam O'Connell began to emerge. Not just a criminal, not just a fugitive, but a son. A devoted, almost obsessively devoted son. His father had died young, leaving his mother, Mary O'Connell, to raise him alone. By all accounts, Liam was fiercely protective of her, devoted to her well-being. He'd helped her with her small bakery from dawn till dusk, every day before school. He'd done chores, errands, everything to ease her burden. Teachers, neighbors, friends, they all painted the same picture. A good son, almost to a fault. One detail, repeated by several sources, struck me particularly hard. Worried about his mother's early morning bakery shifts in the cold winter months, Liam, a teenager himself, had gone hungry for weeks, skipping lunches, saving every penny of his meager allowance. He'd saved enough to buy her a warm wool coat. This man, capable of such tenderness, such selflessness, was he also capable of rape, assault, and now, potentially, murder? Could this gentle son be a brutal killer? Trace evidence, ballistics, DNA, these were all vital. But sometimes, the most crucial evidence wasn't physical. It was psychological. It was understanding the human heart. And I had a feeling, a gut feeling, that the key to finding Liam O'Connell lay not in his criminal past, but in his relationship with his mother, Mary O'Connell. It was time, I decided, to pay Mrs. O'Connell a visit. Mary O'Connell lived in a rundown, forgotten corner of town, a sprawling shantytown clinging to the edge of the city. Garbage overflowed from overflowing bins. Stray dogs scavenged in the alleys, the air thick with the smells of decay and desperation. Yet, amidst this urban wasteland, Mary O'Connell's little bakery stood, incongruously cheerful, stubbornly open for business. I ordered a coffee, choosing a table furthest from Mary, wanting to observe her unnoticed. She was small, barely 5'4", thin, almost frail. Her skin was weathered, loose, the skin on her face a roadmap of wrinkles, sun-baked and time-worn. A faded floral scarf covered her gray hair. A worn, pale blue apron shielded a simple red sweater, the neckline frayed and patched with clumsy stitches. Mary served my coffee, her movements slow, slightly uneven, a slight limp in her step. A local officer had mentioned she'd been hit by a car years ago, a broken leg that never quite healed properly. She worked alone, a tireless, humming energy in her small frame. Her voice, though quiet, carried clearly as she greeted customers, her hands moving with practiced grace, flipping dough, kneading loaves, serving coffee. From behind the counter, she wielded 2 long chopsticks with surprising speed and precision, expertly maneuvering strips of dough in a bubbling vat of oil, transforming them into golden, steaming crullers. Crullers fried. She moved to the chopping board, her movements deliberate, the gleaming cleaver rising and falling with rhythmic force, chopping vegetables, preparing fillings. Watching her, I remembered my own grandmother, who always insisted on hand-chopped meat for dumplings, scoffing at pre-ground meat as tasteless and unclean. Mary was polite to everyone, efficient, but her face remained set, devoid of any genuine warmth, any hint of a smile. Beside her cash register was a small, worn coin box. Customers paid, dropped coins in the box, made their own change. Mary rarely glanced at it, trusting, or perhaps simply too weary to care. My coffee grew cold. The morning rush thinned. I stood, walking towards Mary. A quick glance at the coin box. Nestled amongst the coins, a relic from another era. A Nokia phone, the old brick-like kind, capable only of calls and texts. I bet the call history on that phone was meticulously clean. I pulled out a pre-prepared envelope, thick with cash. I held it out to Mary. "Mrs. O'Connell?" I began, my voice low, respectful. "I'm a friend of Liam's. He asked me to bring you this $2,000. Mary looked up, her eyes, faded blue, narrowed with suspicion. She glanced at the envelope, then back at me, her hands still moving, shaping dough. She didn't take it. After a long moment, she mumbled, almost to herself, "Don't try to fool me, young man. How do you know my son is Liam?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice even further. "Liam told me. He said you still run the bakery here." I asked around. Everyone knows Mary O'Connell's bakery. Mary kept her head down, still needing dough. Everyone around here knows my son is Liam, and everyone knows I've been selling crawlers here for years. The fugitive task force had been here, I realized, many times. She was wary, guarded. I pressed on, Liam said. He wanted you to buy a new coat with this. He said he worries about you being out in the cold so early. The words seemed to break through her defenses. Mary stopped kneading, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She pulled me aside, away from the few remaining customers, her eyes darting around, checking for eavesdroppers. When she was sure we were alone, she whispered, "You really know Liam?" I nodded, offering the envelope again. Still, she didn't take it. Instead, she gripped my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. "He's struggling out there, isn't he? Needs money. Every month, he sends me money, but I haven't touched a penny, saving it all for him, for when he comes back, to pay back what he owes." Her voice cracked, a raw sob catching in her throat. She started to reach for the coin box, to give me the money back. Got her. The monthly money transfers. A hidden account. A lifeline. Mary O'Connell was the key. But seeing her face, the raw grief etched in every line, a wave of unease washed over me. I couldn't keep up the charade. The lie felt heavy, suffocating. Muttering something about an urgent call, I turned to leave, placing the envelope in the coin box as I passed. She called after me, her voice hoarse, but I kept walking, unable to face her anymore. As I walked away from the shantytown, Mary O'Connell's face haunted me. It was like looking at my own mother. The weariness, the quiet strength, the unwavering love for her child, even a flawed child. The resemblance was uncanny, unsettling. Years ago, during the SARS epidemic, my father, a doctor, was quarantined at the hospital for months. To make ends meet, my mother, without telling me, started getting up at 2 in the morning, driving out to the wholesale fruit market in the suburbs, buying produce, and selling it from a small street stall. Her little cart, her worn apron, her tireless energy, so much like Mary O'Connell. One night, driving back from the market in the pre-dawn darkness, she'd been hit by a car on an unlit road. She'd been unconscious for hours, her head injuries severe. When she woke, they told us she'd need stitches, her vision in one eye permanently damaged by nerve damage. Even now, years later, she still walks with a slight sway, her balance affected, her vision blurred. I glanced back at Mary O'Connell's bakery. She was standing in the doorway, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her small frame silhouetted against the warm glow of the bakery lights. Then she turned and limped back inside. Leaving the shantytown, I immediately called my captain, requesting an urgent warrant to access Mary O'Connell's bank records. Something felt different this time. Something was about to break. The bank records came back, stark and disappointing. Only one account in Mary O'Connell's name. Routine transactions, small deposits and withdrawals, nothing unusual, no large or hidden sums, no sign of Liam's monthly transfers. Where was I going wrong? Was I chasing a phantom? Was my whole theory built on a false premise? I spread Mary O'Connell's bank statements across my desk, a chaotic mess of numbers and dates. Frustrated, I grabbed a desk calendar, tearing off the pages, month by month, arranging them in order. Then, I started marking the deposits on each calendar page, circling the dates, writing in the amounts. A visual representation of her finances. A desperate attempt to find a pattern in the seeming chaos. My eyes darted across the calendar pages, jumping from red circle to red circle, my brain struggling to decipher the patterns, the rhythms of her finances. No large withdrawals, only deposits. Small, consistent deposits. And no transfers, no external deposits, all cash deposits made at the teller window. The deposit method was a dead end. I shifted focus to the frequency of the deposits. Some circles clustered together, days apart. Others were spaced further out, weeks apart. No discernible pattern. No fixed deposit schedule. Mary O'Connell deposited money seemingly at random. Staring at the numbers, my vision blurred. The dates and amounts swam before my eyes. I closed my eyes, rubbing them, trying to clear my head, to break free from the tunnel vision. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a rhythm began to emerge from the seeming randomness. A connection between deposit amounts and intervals. Deposits made within 2 or 3 days of each other were usually smaller, $300 to $500. Deposits spaced 5 days or more apart were larger, $800 to $1,000. Based on the frequency and the accumulated amounts, these were likely her bakery earnings. Krullen money. But where was Liam's money? Where were the monthly transfers? I stared harder at the calendar, my gaze fixed on the circled dates, the recurring pattern, the subtle anomaly hidden within the apparent randomness. Same dates, different dates. Same amounts, different amounts. What was constant? What was changing? It was like a coded message, a string of Morse code dots and dashes, meaningless individually, but holding a hidden message when viewed together. Then it hit me. The last Sunday of each month. Every single month, without fail, a deposit was made on the last Sunday, and the amount was consistently higher than her usual daily earnings, even if she'd just made a deposit a day or two before. Every last Sunday, a larger sum, deposited like clockwork. Where did that extra money come from? Did the bakery suddenly see a surge in business every last Sunday of the month? Unlikely. Was this Liam's mistake? His tell? I raced to a bank branch just a few blocks from Mary O'Connell's bakery. I walked in, asking for a teller, explaining I was investigating a case, showing my badge. I asked if they recognized Mary O'Connell. Of course they did. She was a regular. I asked if she usually deposited cash or checks. Cash, they confirmed. Always cash. And always in $100 bills. Never smaller denominations. Sometimes, one teller added, she even comes in to exchange smaller bills for hundreds. That was odd. I flashed back to Mary's bakery, the coin box overflowing with small bills, loose change. Bakery earnings were almost entirely in small denominations, coins, and small bills. If her bakery earnings were primarily in small bills, why was she depositing only $100 bills? I suspected she wasn't depositing bakery earnings at all. I suspected she was withdrawing cash first, then depositing the $100 bills, concealing the true source of the funds. Has Mrs. O'Connell ever made any withdrawals here? I asked. The tellers exchanged glances, hesitant. Finally, one said, I don't recall personally handling any withdrawals for her, but I can't be sure about other tellers. Just then, a security guard, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. I might know who you're talking about, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. That little old lady from the bakery? She uses the ATM sometimes. I've helped her operate it a few times. ATM withdrawals. That was it. I immediately contacted my captain, requesting security footage from the ATM. The footage confirmed it. Mary O'Connell, withdrawing cash from the ATM, then walking straight to the teller window, depositing the cash into her account. And the ATM transaction log revealed the crucial detail. The withdrawal was made using an out-of-state ATM card, not in Mary's name. I immediately tasked my team with tracing the out-of-state ATM card, identifying the account holder, and tracking the transaction history. The pieces were finally clicking into place. After weeks of dead ends, of frustration, of chasing shadows, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of momentum building. I smiled, the first genuine smile in days. I pulled out my phone, opened the calendar app, and tapped the screen, showing it to my captain. He glanced at it, then looked up, his eyes widening in understanding, a flicker of excitement mirroring my own. For days away, the calendar displayed the date, the last Sunday of the month. The out-of-state account holder, whoever they were, would be making another transfer to Mary O'Connell's secret account. The bait was set, and I had a feeling, a strong feeling, that Liam O'Connell was about to take it. I could almost taste him. I was close. So close. The bank contact confirmed it. The account holder for the ATM card Mary O'Connell used wasn't Liam O'Connell. This didn't surprise me in the slightest. If it had been that simple, the fugitive task force wouldn't have spent 5 years chasing a ghost. This account holder, my contact continued, has multiple cards registered under their name. It's likely someone who specializes in opening accounts and selling them. And the originating location for the money transfers? All trace back to village and town bank branches near the Coal Mountain crime scene. The sender information was even murkier. 3 different names had appeared on the transfer slips over time. Were these 3 names aliases for the same person? Could it be Liam, cleverly disguising his tracks? Or was he using intermediaries, getting someone else to make the transfers for him? Because these deposits weren't frequent and, crucially, always happened on Sundays, the busiest day for rural banks, none of the bank staff at those branches recognized any of the 3 names on the transfer slips. Their faces were lost in the Sunday crowds. I instructed the tech team leader to pull security footage from those banks. His response was deflating. These are small village banks, he explained, his voice laced with disappointment. Their security systems aren't exactly state-of-the-art. Video retention is minimal, maybe a few weeks at best. Definitely not back to 2016. I was still a distance from finding the real Liam O'Connell. But these transfers to Mary O'Connell were a tangible link, a breadcrumb trail. These three individuals, whoever they were, had to be connected to Liam. I had to seize this thread and pull. Back in the office, I laid out the collection of bank transfer slips on my desk, each bearing one of the three sender names. None of them was Liam O'Connell. The IDs used to open these accounts, if they were even real, pointed to individuals from remote, impoverished regions in Western China. Likely purchased identities, ghosts in the system. I'd put out formal requests for assistance to those regions, but I couldn't afford to just sit and wait for results. I'd already made contact with Mary O'Connell. I had to move fast, before Liam, if it was him, sensed something was amiss. I picked up the transfer slips, shuffling them, scrutinizing them under the harsh office lights. I even held them to my nose, inhaling deeply, a ridiculous attempt to glean some hidden, olfactory clue. Finally, my focus narrowed to the sender's handwriting. These signatures, these hastily scribbled names, could be my first, albeit indirect, meeting with Liam O'Connell, and potentially the quickest way to confirm if these three names belong to a single person. I noticed something peculiar. The recipient name, the account number, the transfer amount. These three sections were clearly written in different hands, distinct and separate. A normal person, worried about making a mistake, would carefully, meticulously fill out the form. But on these slips, the sections involving numbers were scrawled quickly, almost carelessly, extending beyond the printed boxes. The writer was clearly familiar with these forms, possibly even rushed. My hunch solidified. The amount and account number sections were likely filled out by bank tellers. They handled these forms countless times a day, their familiarity breeding a kind of careless efficiency. But the sender's signature, that was different. That had to be handwritten by the person making the deposit. That was my focus for handwriting analysis. I grabbed a magnifying glass, leaning closer, meticulously measuring the spacing between each stroke of the three signatures, recording the precise angles and distances. I then studied the writing order, the direction of each stroke, and then, a jolt of excitement. Potential breakthrough. In each signature, the connecting strokes within the right side character flowed from heavy to light, seamlessly, linking to the first stroke of the left side character. In essence, the signatures were written right to left. This writing habit, it strongly suggested a left-handed writer. Furthermore, I observed the final stroke of each signature, the very last flick of the pen. Heavy pressure, a noticeable deepening of ink color compared to the initial strokes. At this point, I was almost certain. The person signing these slips was left-handed. Even though the names differed, the handwriting remained consistent. While someone might consciously alter their font, fundamental writing habits, the ingrained movements of the pen were notoriously difficult to disguise. I was reasonably confident these three signatures were penned by the same individual. But without a known sample of Liam O'Connell's handwriting for comparison, I couldn't definitively say that individual was Liam. 3 days. Just 3 days until the last Sunday of the month, Liam's usual deposit day. Captain made the call, decisive and immediate. We move in. We take him down. But a critical question loomed. Which bank branch would Liam choose this time? He was careful, methodical. He wouldn't make it easy. I spread a local map across the table, marking each of the bank branches where Liam had made deposits in the past. Looking at the distribution, a pattern emerged. The branches clustered around the Coal Mountain crime scene, a loose, almost mocking circle. I connected the dots with lines, tracing Liam's movements, his banking pilgrimage. East, west, south, north. Each deposit location was roughly diagonal from the previous one. Checking the historical records, the last deposit had been in the south. Predicting the general direction, north, wasn't the challenge. Pinpointing the specific branch within the north sector was the real puzzle. There were 3 bank branches in the northern sector. He wouldn't revisit the same branch twice in a row. That much was clear from the pattern. Beyond that, it seemed random, unpredictable. Which branch would he choose this time? I got in my car, Captain beside me, our eyes scanning the streets, searching for any subtle difference, any telltale sign that might distinguish one branch from another. Each bank branch felt like a potential gold mine, a hidden trove of truth. And this entire treasure map, this network of bank branches, held the key to a truth I'd chased for over 1,200 miles. Finally, Captain and I made a decision. We'd stake out 2 of the 3 northern branches, covering our bases. Captain looked at me. Which one do you want? Liam was left-handed. Intuition, a gut feeling, guided my choice. Let's take the left one. Early spring chill still hung in the air. Huddled in the back seat of the unmarked car, wrapped in a thick coat, I was a statue of tense anticipation. No cigarettes, no phone, just the case files replaying in my mind, over and over, searching for any overlooked detail, any forgotten thread. Eyes closed, but sleep was a distant luxury. Those 2 days were a blur of tense waiting, gnawing anxiety. The thought that gnawed at me the most was the deception. I'd used a mother's love, her desperate longing for her son, as bait. It felt wrong, but I couldn't afford regret. I owed it to that 12-year-old girl, to her grieving parents who had knelt before me, begging for justice. I found myself wondering, over and over, did these criminals ever consider their own families? Did they ever think of the pain they inflicted, the ripple effect of their choices? Before returning to the crime scene area for Liam's capture, I made one last detour. Back to Mary O'Connell's humble bakery in the shantytown. I went alone, a clandestine visit. Hesitation warred with a deep, unsettling need to see her again. Finally, I parked the car a block away, watching from a distance, not daring to approach. Reason dictated I shouldn't be there. Not now. Not on the verge of apprehending her son. And a deeper fear gnawed at me. Fear of losing control, of letting my emotions compromise the entire operation, everything we'd worked for. But another voice, a relentless inner critic, lashed at me. The lead that was about to break this case wide open, the clue that would lead us to Liam, it was built on a lie. A lie I'd spun, preying on a mother's desperate hope. Mary O'Connell seemed lighter, somehow, than our last encounter. A subtle shift in her demeanor. She placed plates of steaming buns and crullers on tables with a gentler touch. She raised her chopsticks in a cheerful greeting to familiar customers. She even looked up, offering a small nod of thanks, when customers dropped coins into the worn cash box. Hope, a fragile, nascent hope had bloomed in Mary O'Connell's face, fueled by the news of her son, delivered by me, a stranger bearing false tidings. Watching her move around her small bakery, a solitary figure amidst the swirling steam of the fryer, a lump formed in my throat. I blinked hard, fighting back the unwelcome sting of tears. The first hint of dawn painted the sky a soft, pale gray, pushing back the darkness. I started the car, slowly pulling away from the bakery, then pressed the accelerator hard, the engine roaring to life. I was going to catch Liam O'Connell. Sunday morning. Outside the Northern Bank branch near the Coal Mountain, 2 unmarked cars, 8 officers, poised and ready. My head throbbed, a dull ache from days of relentless tension, sleepless nights, and stale coffee. I stared intently at the bank entrance, my gaze fixed, unblinking. 2 full days. No shift changes. No shower. No shave, teeth unbrushed. Fueled by lukewarm coffee and 2 greasy buns each morning, a single, hurried bathroom break. Dehydration had cracked my lips, my throat burned. All for this moment. To witness, with my own eyes, Liam O'Connell's capture. Captain had prearranged a signal with the bank staff. When the teller recognized the person making the deposit to Mary O'Connell's account, they would discreetly touch their forehead, a silent alarm. The bank doors swung open, and a surge of people flooded in, the Sunday morning rush. Static crackled on the radio. The tech team leader's voice, strained and anxious. Too many people. Security cameras, visibility is compromised. The tech team had photos of Liam O'Connell, disguised, yes, but identifiable. The plan was visual confirmation, direct recognition, but we hadn't anticipated this crowd, this human tide. And no signal from the teller yet. We were blind, vulnerable. No one dared make a move. Then, a figure emerged from the throng, pushing his way through the crowd. Short, but powerfully built, a hulking presence despite his ragged clothes. A homeless man, matted, tangled hair obscuring his face, clothes stained and ripped, the grime ingrained. People recoiled, making way, their faces wrinkling in disgust. And then, it happened. A teller, holding a deposit slip, pointed a trembling finger at the homeless man, her eyes wide with disbelief, her mouth gaping. A split second later, she clapped her hand to her forehead, a gesture of shock, of fear, of silent confirmation. Her face drained of color, she stumbled back from her chair, a ghost in her own station. The bank manager, alerted by the commotion, rushed over, his eyes following the teller's gaze. He saw the deposit slip, saw the homeless man, saw the teller's signal. Understanding flashed across his face. He gently guided the shaken teller aside, slid into her chair, composing himself, forcing a polite smile for the next customer, while discreetly, almost imperceptibly, touching his own forehead. Captain's voice, sharp and urgent, crackled over the radio. Lou, you've got him. That's our guy. Take down the long-haired homeless man. Exercise extreme caution. Adrenaline surged, jolting me upright. I frantically wiped the condensation from the car window, my heart pounding against my ribs. Target confirmed. Engage. The homeless man exited the bank, walking slowly, deliberately, about 100 yards. The Sunday morning crowds thinned. He bent down, reaching for a discarded plastic water bottle, scavenging for scraps. Just as he straightened up, R2. Cars converged, flanking him, boxing him in, a steel trap closing. Before he could react, before he could even fully stand, 5, 6 officers swarmed him, tackling him to the ground, a flurry of limbs and dark fabric against the gray asphalt. Handcuffs snapped shut. A quick, brutal body search. Efficient, practiced, ruthless. I stumbled out of the car, a wave of dizziness washing over me. I leaned heavily against the car door, fighting to stay upright, the world tilting around me. The homeless man's face was pressed against the ground, his cheek scraping against the rough surface, drawing blood. He struggled. A desperate, animalistic fight. His eyes were bloodshot, bulging, his voice a raw, strangled scream, veins throbbing in his neck. I knelt beside him, my voice strained, forcing it to cut through his frantic cries, through the chaos and noise. Mary O'Connell, I shouted, my voice thick with emotion, sent me to bring you home. The words hit him like a physical blow. His struggle ceased, his body going limp, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had erupted. He turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto mine, a complex, unreadable mix of emotions swirling within them. I fumbled for a cigarette, lighting it with shaking hands, taking a deep, shaky drag, then exhaling a plume of smoke towards the bruised sky. I looked up, a choked laugh escaping my lips. Finally, I muttered, finally, the damn sun's come out. They hauled the homeless man to his feet, one officer on each side, shoving him into the back of the car. I climbed in after them, collapsing onto the seat, exhaustion pulling me down. He suddenly lunged forward, his face inches from mine, a wave of rank, fetid breath hitting me. In that fleeting moment, that close, desperate proximity, his face, smeared with blood and grime, became familiar. You saw my mother? The question, raw and desperate, hung in the air, thick with the stench of unwashed clothes and despair. This homeless man, this desperate, broken figure, this was Liam O'Connell. And then it hit me, a jolt of icy recognition. That night, my first night at the coal mine crime scene. The homeless man who had tapped on my car window, begging for a water bottle. Liam. It was Liam. For 1,000 kilometers, a relentless, grueling chase. And the killer, the answer, had been there all along. The very first person I'd encountered at the Coal Mountain crime scene had been the perpetrator himself. I didn't answer Liam. Words seemed inadequate, meaningless. The tech team processed Liam O'Connell. Fingerprints, DNA swabs. The fingerprint comparison was swift, conclusive. The smudge of blood and coal dust on the little girl's neck. It was a match. The dead man's fingerprint. The real owner, finally, found. After his arrest, Liam O'Connell was a different man. The frantic fight had vanished. He was listless, withdrawn, refusing food, refusing to speak. But the silence didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. His confession, or lack thereof, was almost irrelevant. I collapsed onto the cot in the duty room, sinking into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted a full day. I woke at dusk, groggy, disoriented. The team leader handed me a cigarette, then turned and left the room. He returned a moment later, carrying a steaming bowl piled high with food. I took it, shoveling it into my mouth, ravenous, starved. The team leader sat across from me, watching in silence until I'd finished. Liam wants to see you. For Liam O'Connell, I realized, I had a lot I wanted to say too. I followed the team leader to the interrogation room. The moment Liam saw me, his first words, raw and desperate, were, "How's my mother?" "I can only tell you this, Liam," I replied, my voice hard, unwavering. "Your mother, Mary O'Connell, is still running her bakery, day in, day out, all to save money for you, to pay restitution to the victim's parents." The words hung in the air, heavy, accusatory. Liam's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down his face, silent at first, then escalating into wrenching sobs. His face, perpetually grimy, became streaked with clean paths where tears had washed away the dirt. When his crying subsided, I turned to leave, pausing at the door. Confessing or not, you're going down, Liam. But cooperate, tell us everything, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get to see your mother again. For real. Liam confessed everything. His first crime, years ago, the one initially labeled attempted rape, was a lie, a mischaracterization of his true, devastating inadequacy. It wasn't attempted rape. It was his crippling impotence. The woman he'd assaulted was his girlfriend. Since puberty, he'd felt different, broken, recoiling from any mention of sex. His girlfriend had discovered his secret, his inability to perform sexually. She'd broken up with him, decisively, brutally. Liam, humiliated, enraged, confronted her after her night shift, forcing her to a secluded spot, desperate, pathetic, to prove himself, to force her to recant her rejection. But in that desperate, forced encounter, his body failed him again, utterly, humiliatingly. She broke free, spitting insults, taunting him, mocking his impotence. Something snapped. Liam, in a blind rage, grabbed her hair, slamming her head against the ground, again and again, until she lay still, broken. She suffered a severe brain hemorrhage, leaving her with lifelong disabilities. He'd fled home, collapsing before Mary O'Connell, confessing only that he'd messed up, asking for money to disappear. Mary, thinking it was just another brawl, gave him what little she had, telling him to lie low, to make amends. But then news of his girlfriend's critical condition reached him. Then the police investigation, her identification of him as the attacker. Panic seized him. Flight was the only option he could comprehend. He fled, drifting, eventually ending up at the coal mine, 1,200 miles from his past. He'd hoped to find work in the mines, anonymity in the darkness, but fear of detection drove him to the fringes, to scavenging, to the life of a ghost. But Mary O'Connell was always on his mind. After 3 years of silence, years of living in the shadows, years of evading capture, Liam, emboldened by the silence, by the absence of pursuit, started to believe he was safe, that the past had faded. He bought a prepaid bank card, scribbled a note, and mailed it to Mary. In the note, a fragile lifeline, a coded message, monthly transfers at the end of each month. End of the month, when he had the most scraps saved, the most to send, a small offering to his mother, a desperate attempt at atonement, a silent, I'm still alive. Living as a scavenger, Liam often encountered the wives and daughters of miners, also scavenging, competing for the same meager resources. He chased them away, fiercely protective of his territory, his scraps. Every scrap was potential money for Mary. Their scavenging diminished his earnings, threatened his ability to provide for her, to send that monthly lifeline. On the day of the murder, Liam saw the little girl scavenging again, alone this time, her mother nowhere in sight. He chased her, intent on driving her away. As she ran, the girl, small but defiant, picked up cold chunks, hurling them at Liam. One struck him, a sharp sting of pain and humiliation. Rage, a familiar, blinding rage, erupted within him. He lunged, tackling her, pinning her down on the coal mountain. She struggled, her small body writhing beneath his weight. He grabbed a larger coal chunk, raising it high, and brought it down with brutal force on her head. She went still. Silence descended. Panic, cold and sharp, replaced the rage. If she woke, she'd report him. He'd be caught, captured, and who would take care of Mary? Only one option remained. Brutal, final, irreversible. Liam reached for the girl's throat. Detectives asked him, in the sterile interrogation room, why he hadn't fled again, like before, running thousands of miles to escape the consequences of his actions. Liam's answer was chillingly simple. Back then, someone recognized me. This time, no one saw me. Why would I run? In his mind, there was no other path, no other choice. His world was defined by flight, by desperation, by a twisted, self-serving logic born of fear and guilt. Unexpectedly, after Liam's arrest, Mary O'Connell herself requested to see me. I braced myself. Verbal abuse, accusations, tears, even physical violence. I was prepared for it all. Mary O'Connell's eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, fixed on mine. I struggled to maintain focus, to use my training, to analyze her gaze, to decipher the emotions swirling within them. But in that moment, all I saw was my own mother's face, her quiet strength, her enduring love. And I felt like a child again, caught in a wrong I couldn't undo. 5 years ago, The day Liam knelt before her, confessing his mistake, Mary had dismissed it as just another fight, another youthful indiscretion. She'd given him money, sent him on his way, blind to the darkness that had already consumed him. The truth, when it finally surfaced, had shattered her. She'd wept for days. Without word from her fugitive son, within a year, her hair had turned completely white. She desperately wanted him to surrender, to come home, but terror of prison, of punishment, held her back. Instead, she clung to a fragile hope, a delusion of atonement. If she saved enough money, enough restitution for the victim, maybe, just maybe, his sentence would be lighter. From that day on, rain or shine, Mary O'Connell's bakery never missed a day of operation. Victims' family members, consumed by their own grief and rage, haunted her bakery. They'd harass customers, drive away business, occupy tables, their presence a constant accusatory shadow. Mary never fought back. She endured their insults, their accusations, the judging stares of onlookers, in stoic silence, never shedding a tear. Until one day, they went too far. They grabbed a tray of freshly fried crawlers, dumping them on the dirty street, stomping them into a greasy mess. They smashed urns of steaming soy milk, scalding liquid splattering everywhere. Mary, caught in the chaos, was shoved to the ground. She'd scrambled to her feet, teeth clenched, her face pale with a terrifying resolve. She grabbed the cleaver from her chopping board, pressing the cold steel against her own throat. "My life is yours," she cried out, her voice hoarse with despair. The outburst, raw and unexpected, silenced them. They froze, their anger momentarily deflated by her self-destruction. Mary had told the victim's family, her voice trembling but firm, that she would repay them, every cent. But they would have to wait. Wait for her son, Liam, to return. He would be the one to make amends, to offer his own restitution. Later, Mary had been hit by a car while pushing her cart, a broken leg, a settlement. But she'd refused proper medical care, the limp, a constant reminder of her sacrifice. Every yuan saved, every discomfort endured, was for Liam, for his future, for his redemption. 2 years ago, the anonymous package had arrived, the prepaid card and the cryptic note. No return address, no message, just that lifeline, that monthly deposit. She still didn't know where he was, but knowing he was alive, that he remembered her, had brought a flicker of fragile joy to her desolate existence. The prepaid card, registered to a stranger, always worried her. She feared some unknown entity would siphon off Liam's hard-earned savings. So, each month, as soon as the deposit arrived, she withdrew it, redepositing it into her own account, a clumsy attempt at security, at control. In Mary O'Connell's heart, saving enough money was synonymous with Liam's return, with his absolution, with a fragile hope for a future that was already lost. I asked her, that day in the precinct, "Mrs. O'Connell, did you really believe I was a friend of Liam's?" She simply said, her voice barely a whisper, that I was different from the other police officers she'd encountered. She craved information about her son, desperate for any connection, any reassurance. More than that, she wanted Liam to know her heart, her unwavering love, her enduring sacrifice. And when I'd offered the envelope of cash, that small act of friendship, she'd clung to that hope, to that fragile lie. "Mrs. O'Connell," I asked, the question heavy on my tongue, do you blame me?" She choked back a sob, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Blame you? No," she whispered, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of the interrogation room. "If I blame anyone, I blame you for not catching my son sooner." I turned away, unable to meet her gaze, the weight of her grief, her quiet resignation, crushing me. The last Sunday of the month came and went. No deposit arrived in Mary O'Connell's account. She stared blankly at the ATM screen, watching the seconds tick down, the timer expiring, the machine swallowing her card. In that moment, a stone settled in her heart. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her son, her fugitive son, Liam O'Connell, had been caught. No one knew the weight of waiting like Mary O'Connell. But this time, she knew the waiting was over. There would be no more waiting. She turned, walking slowly, heavily, to the bank counter, withdrawing every last yuan from her account. The money she'd painstakingly saved, the remnants of her shattered hope. Mary O'Connell's hands, red and raw from the winter chill, gripped mine, her dry lips trembling, tears threatening to spill. When will he come home? This time, looking into her eyes, I saw the light fading, dimming, almost extinguished, and I had no answer, no comfort to offer. Then, without warning, without a sound, Mary O'Connell sank to her knees before me, just like the coal miner couple, months ago, their grief mirroring hers, their desperation a shared burden. She lifted a worn cloth bag from the floor, untying the knot, revealing a stack of 100 yuan bills, the tangible manifestation of her years of sacrifice, her dwindling hope. This might not be enough, she whispered, her voice cracking. But I can earn more. I'll keep working. Just let him come home soon. Her rough, calloused hand reached up, wiping a tear from her cheek. Then her hands gripped mine again, clinging, pleading, as if holding on to the last vestiges of hope itself. I looked away, unable to bear her gaze, taking a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady, calm, even as my heart ached. Mrs. O'Connell, I began, my voice low, measured. I can't promise when he'll come home, because Liam has committed a far more serious crime. Just like years ago, when I told my own grandmother the truth, the irreversible truth about her failing eyesight, I couldn't lie to Mary O'Connell. Even knowing the pain it would inflict, even knowing the regret that might linger, I couldn't offer false comfort, false hope. I kept my promise to Liam. I arranged for him to see Mary O'Connell. Liam arrived in handcuffs and leg irons, the clinking of chains echoing in the sterile visiting room. When his eyes met Mary's, no words passed between them. His legs buckled, a silent plea for forgiveness, for absolution. But before he could fall to his knees, the guards behind him restrained him, their grip firm, unyielding. Mary O'Connell's composure shattered. She lunged forward, reaching through the metal bars, her hand outstretched, desperate to touch her son's face, to offer a mother's comfort, even through steel and despair. I and another officer stepped forward, gently blocking her path. Mary's fists clenched, her small frame trembling, a desperate surge of maternal protectiveness, battling against the unyielding reality of prison bars and handcuffs. She leaned against my shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs, her voice choked, broken. Then, slowly, the fight seemed to drain out of her. Her clenched fists loosened, her body slumped, the desperate energy dissipating, leaving only a hollow, pleading look in her eyes. I shook my head, a silent, helpless denial. There was nothing I could do. Liam's leg irons remained locked. Those chains, I knew, would also lock around Mary O'Connell's heart, binding her to a grief that would never truly release. I nodded to the guards, a silent request. They exchanged a glance, a flicker of human compassion in their eyes. They didn't unlock Liam, but their grip loosened, a small concession to a mother's despair. Liam finally sank to his knees, his head bowing low, striking the floor with a heavy thud. "Mom!" Mary O'Connell, hearing his voice, the raw plea in that single word, straightened up, her own tears momentarily forgotten. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, her voice regaining a fragile strength. "Lift your head, Liam. Let me see your face." Liam's shoulders shook, his body convulsed with silent sobs. He kept his head bowed, his voice a choked whisper, his final, heartbreaking request. "Mom, I want to drink your soy milk." On the drive back, Mary O'Connell clutched a large thermos tightly to her chest, filled with her homemade soy milk, still warm, still fragrant. I knew how good that soy milk tasted, how comforting it would be, but Liam would never taste it. The coal miner couple had lost their daughter. Mary O'Connell had lost her son, and I realized, with a chilling certainty, that this agonizing loss was Liam O'Connell's true punishment, a punishment far deeper, far more enduring than any sentence the law could impose. Before dropping Mary O'Connell off, I pressed my bank card into her hand. Liam's monthly transfers had been a grim reminder, a monthly tolling bell, marking another month of his fugitive existence. Now, I made a new promise, a new monthly ritual. I would deposit money into her account on the first of each month. Because the first of the month, I told her, was always a new beginning. Mary O'Connell said she didn't blame me. But I knew, as I watched her walk away, her small figure limping towards the dim lights of her bakery, that her stall would open again. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. But this new beginning, this fragile hope, had arrived 5 years too late, and it would likely never truly come. I should have caught Liam O'Connell sooner.